This is Counterstrike here. What if I was to tell you that in the Clyde Beatty Act, there was once a fight between his toughest, most skilled fighting tiger versus one of his toughest lions. Both cats weighed around 600 pounds. Let's take a look at this.
He talks about a fight that happened. He talks about being attacked by a Bengal tiger. The big crowd thought it was part of my act when a huge Bengal tiger bowled me over and, seizing me about the waist, began trotting round and round the arena. Beatty describes the tiger as huge. So this is not a tigress. This is a male tiger. The public does not understand what's happening. They thought it was part of the show. Beatty felt he was so near death that he was nauseated. He could feel the big cat's teeth stabbing through his wide leather stomach belt. Every split second I expected the crunch which would end everything. My assistants outside the arena were so paralyzed with terror, they forgot the part expected of them when accidents happen. So Betty's own assistants were so scared because of this attack that they froze. But Betty gets some help. Fortunately for me, there was an enormous Nubian lion in that mixed group of 32 who knew that things weren't going according to the usual schedule. So he says, he and I had always been somewhat friendly. I'm not saying, mind you, that he deliberately acted to save my life, because we know later that this lion actually tried to kill Betty. What he probably figured out was that here was his chance of a lifetime to prove the lion's instinctive hatred for a tiger. Now that I've seen that, able to hold him back. This is exactly what's going on. The lion could see that Betty was taken down and that he would not be able to break up the fight. At least that's what he thought. Betty goes on to say, at any rate, with an ear-splitting roar, he launched down from his pedestal and landed fair and square on the cat's back. The tiger dropped to me instantly and turned to defend itself. What a fight followed. So now, these two big male cats are duking it out, and it's, according to Betty, an incredible fight. Stunned and badly wounded, I cowered on the floor, while those two maddened beasts clawed, slashed, and tore each other with my body under their flying feet. So Betty is literally underneath these two huge lion and tigers fighting each other. He's underneath them. Over and over again, their terrible claws punctured me as they sought to keep their footing. So the lion and tiger, 600 pounds, big lion and tigers, are fighting on top of him. So he's actually able to watch this from the ground, looking up. Fortunately for me, the tiger suddenly gave way before the lion's terrific attack. Somehow I staggered to my feet and drove them to their respective runways, which my panic-stricken attendant suddenly remembered to open. So his attendants literally forgot to open up the runways to let the cats out. Then I herded the other 30 animals out of the arena and collapsed before the door. So Betty is literally breaking up the fight. Even though he's near death, he's still saving the cats. He's still breaking it up. So the attendants dragged him out and then hustled him off to the hospital, where he spent the next 2 weeks. Betty says, I'll carry the scars of the adventure until I die. So will the tiger. For the Nubian had nearly killed him, before I was able to get up and whip them apart. Had Betty not whipped them apart, this huge Bengal tiger may have died. It had always been a miracle to me that the entire group didn't participate in one grand free-for-all, while I lay helpless on the floor. Alright, now the question is, so who was this tiger? We know the lion is this lion right here, Nero, who's also big. But who is the tiger he's referring to here that he states is huge? Well, let's find out. Now, in August 27, 1931, in the Union County Journal for Marysville, Ohio, it talks about a large Bengal tiger that attacks Betty in much the same scenario as Betty described in the Modern Mechanics magazine. It says, now, world's greatest lion tamer found himself a little over a year ago while going through his act, a super feature, the 1931 Ohio State Fair, August 31st, September 5th. Rajah, a magnificent Bengal tiger weighing 600 pounds, was sitting on his pedestal as usual. And we know Rajah is Clyde Beatty's best fighting tiger and one of the fastest tigers that he had as far as striking ability. This tiger Rajah, he stated that he would bet no worse than a draw versus any animal. But the tiger is 600 pounds. It was sitting on its pedestal as usual. It sits on the top pedestal in the center of the act. It is actually the showpiece animal. At this time period, Betty did not have a lion as the top showpiece in the center. He actually had this 600-pound tiger Rajah in that position. Betty was putting one of the animals on the opposite side of the arena through its paces. When glancing sideways, he noticed that Rajah had left his pedestal and was stealthily stalking him, turning in a flash to meet him and shoving his chair forward for protection. Betty was just in time as Rajah rose to his feet, plunged upward and forward, crushed the chair in splinters, and one enormous leap sprang on Betty and bore him to the ground. Sharp claws tearing his shoulders, arm and side, sharp teeth grasping his neck and dragging him around the arena. Spectators were horrified. So we see that in this article here in the paper, they state that Betty was dragged around the arena. So this is the same thing, similar description to what Betty was saying happened, being dragged around by the huge Bengal in the Modern Mechanics magazine. Betty's assistants and many helpers rushed the cage, expecting to drag out his mangled and torn body, but sometimes miracles happen. Upon the top perch in the center of the ring sat Nero, one of the largest specimens ever brought to this country. Betty had always maintained that Nero had no affection for him, that the affection is non-existent in his cats, that Nero did have an admiration for him. So, again, this is, a lot of people think that the lions are always trying to save Betty. It just is not true. They're just seeing the opportunity to attack the tiger. Again, we know that this lion, Nero, gave Clyde Beatty one of his worst attacks that he ever got, and he nearly died in the hospital. Nero's natural antagonism toward his old jungle enemy, the tiger, prevailed, or that he dreamed of a time when native African bushmen had lured him into a cleverly covered pit, had meshed him in nets, bound him, caged him, and transported him into Singapore. So here there's some description and insight into this particular source of this paper, that the lion Nero was actually a wild lion that was brought to America. It talks about it being taken to different places like Singapore, always caged, always being toured from there to London, from London to New York, and then he was shipped to Hagenbeck. Wallace went to quarters in Peru, Indiana, and that's where Betty is, and that's where the Hagenbeck Circus is. It was only upon his arrival there that he was released from his brutal bondages and met the first and only man he had ever known, Clyde Beatty, who treated him with kindness. So this lion has been being shipped to multiple different countries and different places. And then finally, when he gets to Hagenbeck, he's able to get out of the cage and actually work with Betty and move around. So it's possible the lion man might have had some liking to Betty, just simply because he was able to get out of the cage. So the miracle happened. Nero swiftly plunged downward, if indeed squarely on Rajah. So he jumps on the tiger. This is the same thing. Betty said he jumped on his back. This newspaper here is saying he squarely on him. It's very simple. Squarely on the Rajah, the 600-pound tiger. And the second held him fast in mortal combat. So again, this is a deadly fight here. Same thing Betty said. Naturally, Rajah had the battle of his life. He was lucky enough to escape with a few gashes and bruises. So it was the battle of his life. And we know that Betty said that Betty actually broke the fight up, and he said the tiger may have died had he not done that. Well, Betty, beaten and wounded as he was, had the strength enough left to crawl to the safety door, which was opened by attendants, and he was safe once again. He was rushed to the hospital. His wounds were treated, bandaged, his arm placed in a cast. 3 broken ribs were found. Hospital attendees said he would have to stay there 10 days. We know he said 2 weeks. They're saying this paper says 10 days. This was in the afternoon, but in the evening, so great was his willpower and physical endurance that he was back in the arena, and the act went on as usual. So it's possible this happens. He might have come back that day, but he eventually was going to have to go to the hospital for several weeks. So, at any rate, guys, this right here is likely the same exact account as what is in the Modern Mechanics account, right here. Same description, being attacked and dragged around the arena, and so now we know that this is a fight between one of Betty's toughest boss lions, Nero, versus one of his toughest tigers that he ever had, Rajah. And both are 600-pound animals. In this instance, the lion came out on top.